Okay, so today I have Ryan here with me. Hello.
Hey.
So we did a video on Ryan's channel a couple weeks ago when I was at Grind Camp in Nicaragua, and we got some good feedback on it. So we decided to shoot a few more, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I am thrilled and ready.
So glad you're thrilled and ready, even though you don't even know what we're going to talk about.
Yes, you did not tell me, so this is going to be interesting.
So, Grind Camp is sort of a place where digital nomads and entrepreneurs come together and work on all of their stuff and help each other and kind of support each other. And we have some really cool conversations that happen there. So I thought it'd be interesting to capture some of those on video.
We need to video record and do a podcast of some of the conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah.
And they're not planned or prepped or anything, obviously, because it's just like people walking through the house and bringing something up and then just having random conversations about cool stuff. So it's good. But I thought it would be fun to talk about some of the problems in relationships. All right. So I'm interested, one, to kind of hear what you think some of the main problems in relationships are.
Mm-hmm. Main problems in relationships. Okay.
So maybe we'll start there, because I also have an idea of what I want to talk about from there. But any thoughts on that?
Okay, main problems in relationships. That's interesting. Did not expect that question. So main problems. So
I can also kind of tell you what I was thinking, why I prompted this, because we've had some interesting conversations. I think when I was there on expectations in relationships, which is one. So I was thinking about kind of what I thought the main problems with relationships were, and I think one of them is expectations. And I think that plays into all kinds of relationships and issues and all of that. What do you think?
Yeah, so the point I was going to make, I guess, stems from that, really.
Yeah.
So I would say just a lack of expression and communication.
Yes.
Like, to really open up and be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that comes with a level of self-awareness and acceptance and all of that.
Yeah.
So that in itself, I think, is key. I think that is one of the keys to a healthy relationship, you know?
Yeah.
So that you can have a clearer perception of your partner and what they want. And yeah, rightfully, that was, as you said, stems from expectations somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with more on the table, it's easy to accept the realities and just kind of compromise. So I think that is key for me. Like, that is something that I have always tried to counter. But more and more I realize is not the norm in I would say a lot of relationships.
As far as you've tried to counter with, like, communicating more.
Yeah. So like, I'm not just communicating, but what you communicate.
Yeah.
Like how you feel deeply most of the time, especially being a man, because men are like, we're supposed to be strong and manly men.
Yeah.
And not express how we feel, especially when it's bad or sad or challenging,
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was aware of that pretty young, so I tried to always kind of say, hey, this is really how I feel, and I do expect or would like the same from you.
Yeah.
And people are usually very appreciative of that, but because it's so not the norm, it's always kind of like,
what?
Yeah. So off the top of my head, like, that is.
I think that's that's a huge point. And that's kind of when I was thinking about this, I sort of separated the two in my head, like communication and expectations, but obviously they all come together and they go back and forth because what are you communicating about? You need to communicate about everything, including expectations. And I think, like you said, that's something that's really simple, like telling someone, like, this is how I feel, this is what I need, like, this is how I felt when you said that.
Yeah.
And talking about that, it's really simple, but people are really bad at it and don't do it very often or very well, which is, they come into therapy for a lot. And sometimes if you ask, like, oh, well, did you tell them that? They're like, no. What? Why would I tell them that? I just harbored it and became like super worked up and started reacting and doing all this crazy stuff. I didn't say like, hey, when you did that, I felt really sad because it made me feel da 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 da.
Yeah. And that happens like even beyond like relationships like that. Friendships too. Like people really just don't express themselves and say, hey, like even people would say like they have a best friend. I tell them everything. But a situation will happen where they would expect their friend to do a certain thing. And then they may not have, knowing that they would have in the situation. And still not choose to say, hey, I thought this. And what do you think? Like, I was hurt by it. And tell me where your mind is at, where like the situation is concerned.
Yeah, people are so bad at doing that. I mean, and all of us are, I think, to some degree. It's challenging to do that, especially with a friend, or I think it plays into all relationships, like at work. Like if something comes up at work, you may not say anything, or you may not work through it, or I mean, it's all relationships, and I don't think that we're taught very well, like how to do that. And you feel kind of weird doing it. Like, I felt this when it's hard to do, I guess. I mean, maybe you've had more practice at it from a young age, so it's not as hard, or do you still think it's challenging?
I think for the most part, I think it's easy for me, but I still struggle with it at times. Like, in some of my relationships, I would say I still, like, I would have considerations for other factors, which I think is justified at times, but fundamentally the expression is needed, like even though the response may not be what you want, the expression of saying, hey, this is actually how I feel, like that in itself like changes the entire dynamic. At least the other person knows where you stand and how that kind of affects you and the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I think it does get easier the more you practice. Something that helps me, and I think helps a lot of my clients to do it, especially when you're first starting out in doing it, or you feel uncomfortable, is even saying like, hey, I know this may sound crazy, or I know this may sound weird, but, and then saying it, because then it sort of, I don't know, it makes it seem less like, I don't even know how to express that, but instead of saying like, hey, I felt really bad when you said this because of this, which may seem vulnerable or needy or emotional, you say, hey, I know this may sound weird and maybe it's like a little bit of an overreaction, but this is how I felt and I just kind of want to talk about it so we can clear the air. Like most people respond really well when you say that, because you're trying to be open and real and genuine, and people really appreciate when you really try to be genuine, even if it sounds kind of weird. Usually the response to that is good, like, oh, like, thank you for bringing that up. And often it's like they agree, they're like, oh, it's not an overreaction and I'm glad you said something and this is how I was feeling, and it just opens it up to be really real and have a real conversation about it.
I definitely agree with that. Like the response is usually, as you would say, maybe not all the time what you would want, but just being straightforward and open about it definitely, I think, has its positive, despite what triggers there may be. So,
Agreed.
So do you want to discuss like other points? Like, do you want me to give you like another main problem in relationships? Or
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I want to talk about expectations a little bit more, and then maybe we can talk about other problems too. Um, yeah, I was thinking about kind of talking about the problems that we see in relationships and all kinds of relationships. But I think specifically talking about expectations is also interesting because we have had some good conversations about that, and I think that comes up so often, and it's come up recently in some of my couples work that I think it's important to address. And I saw exhibit, an art exhibit in Miami last week that had a quote that was like, expectations are the root of all issues or something like that. So it's on my mind because I think that's so true. And often we don't realize what our expectations are. And usually if I'm mad about something, I can put it back to, oh, I expected them to do this and they didn't. And that's why I'm upset. So instead of being mad at them, I can either address it with them, or I can challenge my expectation, or I can take care of it myself. Then you can deal with it instead of creating more conflict, I think. And it usually comes back to, what was my expectation? Like, what did I expect you to do? And did you know that? Did you know that was my expectation? Because that's also different. If you knew I expected this and you agreed and then you didn't follow through, that's something different. But if I had this expectation in my head and you had no idea and then you didn't follow through, like, I can't really be mad at you for that. I can, and people do, but it's not fair, right?
Yeah, like I think I have a slightly different view where dealing with it yourself is concerned, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a tendency to try to address everything, like even if it's very small and like means nothing. It's like about the cake on the table or something.
Yeah. You're like, let's talk about this.
Yeah, yeah. Like there are very few times that I can say I would have not tried to address the smallest thing. Like, and the funny thing is that I think I always get looked at weird for it, especially when it's small. Like,
yeah.
Especially when I say, hey, so you did this and you responded like that. As I said, it could be in relation to like a slice of cake, but for me, it was, I really just want to understand why, so that in the future, I would know what to expect, or what is your norm, or what your tendencies are, because that in itself would make life easier for both of us. Like, that's how I perceive it,
Mm-hmm.
So in dealing with it on your own, I would say, I'm a bit different in that. Like, I would go right down to the, as I said, the smallest thing and be like, hey, so let's not overlook this,
Yeah. Which is interesting as you're saying that, because I'm thinking of this, and as we're talking, I'm thinking of things that I do and work with people in my practice, but I'm also thinking about myself, and, because I want to share both things and like kind of share how I feel about this. But as you're saying that, for me personally, I think one of the main reasons that I started to take that on more myself was because I didn't, especially when this is a little bit stereotypical, but especially if you're dealing with men in a relationship and you're bringing up, so if I'm bringing up all of that all the time, like, hey, I want to talk about why you ate this piece of cake and you didn't ask me. Like, if I'm bringing that stuff up all the time, sometimes men get a little bit like, whoa, why do you always want to talk about this? You want to process everything. Like, I think maybe getting some of those reactions is where I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can just handle this myself. And I think it's more, for me, it's been more deciding when I should address it with somebody and when I can take care of it myself.
Yeah.
So, like, if if it's really not and maybe both, maybe mentioning like, hey, this is what happened, this is what I felt, and this is sort of like what I'm thinking about it, talking about it that way. But I think there are some things, and I think the culture in general isn't very good at handling your own needs. Yeah. So if I'm feeling some type of way about something, often I can address it in a different way. Maybe that's like calling a friend and processing, or like going for a run or something. I can handle it and handle my stuff. I don't need, me personally, I don't need to maybe talk about everything with somebody if I can sort of handle it myself. But I also do need to handle it with other people a lot. So I think it's figuring out that line and how to communicate that and what works for different people, right? So like if I was still in the house there with you guys, I would probably be able to process more with you and talk about more with you than I would with maybe some of the other guys, because you would obviously be more open to that. So it's also like the dynamic of the different people you're with, right?
Yeah, like I could definitely, I was making the point about the being a manly man, strong thing. Like it's all connected, because I know I am not normal in that regard, And I think because of my circumstances somewhat, like I was raised by a single mother, and I did not have that manly man father figure around to embed that in me, right? So I think I got that from her. Like I have that soft, tendering side, nurturing side from her. So that everything I do, especially in relationships, relates to dealing with a woman and saying, hey, what's wrong? Because she would do that to me. Like, she would be like, hey, so what is the problem? So I'm, as I said, I definitely understand the like the trying to find that line and when to address things, because most people will be bombarded by that, or feel bombarded by that. Like, do you need to address everything?
And that's where it's kind of finding that balance, because if you do bring up things all the time, then it can be a little much for people. Yeah. But then on the other hand, a lot of people will just not address things at all and sweep everything under the rug, and that doesn't work either. So finding a way to balance those things and talk about those things, and I think that's really important. And which kind of brings me into one of the other things that I was thinking about in like issues with the relationships, is I think sometimes there's just major incompatibilities, like major. And one of them would be someone who likes to process everything to like, the millionth degree, and someone who doesn't like to process anything at all, and that's what works for them.
Yeah.
And not just like a little bit, like, hey, I'm not a huge talker, I don't like, like extreme. Those would be really extreme ends. That's really hard to process through.
Of course.
And I think that's one sort of incompatibility that can be worked through, but maybe it's just going to be an issue forever, So I think finding partners that you're compatible with, at least in the major ways, obviously is really helpful and makes life a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's something that people think about or work through when they're dating, especially when they're younger. I get people that are older that think about that more. When you're younger, you don't think about like, oh, what's his communication style? What's his love language? You don't think about that kind of stuff when you're dating and you're younger.
Yeah, that is a fundamental problem, I would say, across the board. Like, even when you're older, like, of course you think about those things more when you're older, but just the concept of giving a relationship genuine time and allowing yourself to be vulnerable for a lengthy period of time to really get a grasp on who this person is before we explore anything else is not a norm, and that in itself, that
like you're saying that, and I'm like, that would be great if that happened, and it doesn't.
It doesn't. It never does. Like, sex will get in the way. Like loneliness will get in the way.
Expectations.
Time. Yeah, expectations. Like
Yes.
you think you're getting this old and you need someone. Like there are so many factors that influence people to not take that slow, open path that lead to a much healthier. And even not if it's healthier, then at least you have clarity and you can say, okay, no, this would not work for me.
This is not working, and this is why. And this is a logical reason why that this isn't healthy for us to move forward. Not like an emotional breakdown and chaos. It's like, no, we took the time and we were real and we were open and we were genuine and we were vulnerable, which I like that you've brought up vulnerability, because that's obviously a huge piece that I also think that as a sort of a society we're pretty bad at, is being really vulnerable, right? That's not an easy thing to do, especially early in a relationship, right?
Yeah, like that. And that in itself has so many cultural, like, men we were now built, I would say, of recent times to be manly men. Mm-hmm. And now you have the argument of equality. So then you have women now trying to be women. Like, I'm strong and independent. Mm-hmm. And all of that contradicts the openness and the
I don't
understanding.
Need a man.
Yeah. To really, I would say that even affects the level of appreciation, Mm-hmm. Because, like, I found myself in a similar situation where I was almost too soft and open and too willing to express, where their expectation was, I need to be a manly man. Like, you need to be strong and make all the decisions. Yeah. Where, as I said, because of how I was raised, to me it's always a matter of maybe not always compromise, but that always needs to be a consideration, you know, because you have a partner, like you have someone else that you are considering, you know.
Yeah. Which is really interesting, I think, because I would say like your willingness and you wanting to express more and process more and be more vulnerable and work through things, that's a good thing, especially if we're looking at it through like a healthy relationship therapeutic lens. But it's interesting that you would get sometimes that people don't want that. Like, women don't want that because their expectation is, obviously none of this is all the time or everybody, but their expectation is like, no, you're supposed to be this way. Like, my expectation of what a man is and how you react to me is a different way. And that's probably something that they were taught, you know, if we go back stereotypically, it's probably from their dad, right? Their dad was like cold, and so their dad responded a certain way, or they learned, you know, that this is how a man is and this is how a man responds. So when you come in and you're like loving and processing and let's talk about this, they're like, what the who is this? Like, I don't, you know.
It's frowned upon sometimes.
It's interesting. You know? Yeah, that's really interesting.
Like I have had that response. Like,
wow.
What? Like, what do you, like, just do this? Or I expect you to just, I'm always like, wait, what? Like, you don't want me to consider you more. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. That's it's crazy. And it shows how complex all of this is, because it's all of these things that we've learned and how we've learned to, you know, value things and process things. And I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah. It is.
Interesting. Well, any other thoughts? Major issues you want to address?
I feel like the point of expectation could go so deep.
I know.
And I think even within that, there are very important topics that may seem minor, but are major.
But of course, you want to talk about them because you want to talk about them all everything.
That's funny. Like, I'm thinking about specific. So let me bring up this one.
Yes.
Point,
no.
right?
Go ahead.
I know this video is being a bit long.
No. Go ahead.
So the expectation of possession of your partner and like that understanding of, okay, for example, let's say I have a female partner, right? Usually the expectation is she is mine alone and she will be untouched and no one else in this world has a right to her, right?
Because I own her.
And because I own her,
yes.
Right? And not saying that there isn't, I guess, a tad of truth in that.
Yeah.
But that in itself is perceived terribly because she's still a human. There are still 7 other billion people on this earth. And like she is still going to get attention and approach and spoken to by other men. And the expectation of her not, and of course she should not entertain it, but the expectation of that not being a possibility or that being a huge deal is crazy. Like, that's impossible, especially if she is, let's say, beautiful by societal standards, you know? She's going to get more attention. More people are going to gravitate to her. And you must understand that is part of life. Like, that is part of being a human. Like, forget relationships. That is her being her. You know? Because...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go. I don't really have much more to say.
I think it's so interesting because there's so many thoughts that I have as you're saying that, because expecting someone or like a person or a couple to go into this bubble where nothing is ever like impacts them, nothing ever touches them, no one ever looks at them or interacts with them, or nothing ever happens, that is impossible to maintain, especially in the society that we have now with social media. And I mean, everyone has their own lives. So obviously that's not realistic. Although I think it is the expectation that like, you are mine, we are a couple, like there's no outside interaction. Obviously there's different variations of relationships that are more open, but that's sort of the traditional monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you...
Could you hold 1 second?
Sure, Ryan. Because I didn't have an expectation that you would sit down this whole time, so it's okay.
Okay, yeah.
I guess my question for you is, like, how do you see that working then, like, in your mind? Because you're saying, like, the expectation that ownership and that you're only mine is not realistic. So what is realistic, do you think? What does that look like, and what is realistic in your mind?
So in my mind, like, I would say off the bat, understanding that person is yours, that perception needs to change. Like, what that really means, right? And what that would look like, I would say just a matter of, like, acceptance. I would say also, even in communicating and understanding your partner more, then you would be more accepting of them, especially if you accept them as your partner after you've gone through the process of understanding their tendencies and how they deal with situations, it's then easier for you to accept the reality of, hey, yes, other men may message my girl, or other men will try to get to my girl, but I understand that she has these values, and I could trust that she would make the decisions that would serve the relationship best. You know, it's like a common thing going to a dance with a girl, right? And I think we spoke about this somewhat, especially where Caribbean culture is like Caribbean dancing is extremely sexy, right? And it can seem violating somewhat to other cultures, right?
Yeah.
But understanding and appreciating that, one, it's a dance. Like some people say, no, it's not just a dance.
Yeah.
It's not just a dance if you make it not just a dance, right? It can still just be a dance. It's just...
Which means we leave it on the dance floor? Is that what...
Wait, this is getting a bit...
You froze for a second.
Yeah, same here.
But that means like the interaction is left there, and it's not taken into anything else, which I think is actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good example, because that means that if that is your partner, they may be dancing with other people and it may be intimate, but you go home together and your partnership is still the same, although you interacted with other people. Right? That doesn't change your, and then that also is like a very secure relationship, because hey, I know where we stand, and I am not possessive of you in that you can't dance with other people. That's fine. And I know that we're going home together, and like, this is cool. I'm fine with this. Is that right?
And even beyond, and I would say both for men and women, but I would say more for women, and I hope this does not come across as sexist. But women being valued is an issue, right? Like, in society, across the board, right? And I think challenges that they have in valuing themselves and understanding that it's okay to be who they are, and challenging for them. And so, like, a woman's life is so much more challenging than a man's, I think, because you all need to have like kids, and you all, I think, have far different responsibilities than we do. Yes, we need to provide and so on by societal standards. Yeah. But the point I'm making is, like, reinforcing a woman's beauty by getting attention from other men, I think, is important. Like, knowing that men still find you attractive, and knowing that, yeah, I did go out tonight looking good, and that, like, I got appreciated for making that effort. As I said, I don't think it is as big for most men, but I think that is important for women. Like, I think women do want to feel beautiful. Like, women want to feel like they are appreciated and they are seen. And I feel like that is important. Like, I would like, I know this is definitely not the norm. But
yeah,
I like the reinforcement for my partner to know that she does feel beautiful. Like, I'm not the only one that thinks she's beautiful. She knows that she's beautiful because she gets that reinforcement. She is self-aware. And outside of that, the icing on that, she gets attention from people saying, hey, yes, you're beautiful. Hey, yes, you're very attractive. Like, I think that is important. You know, as I said, I think I know it's not the norm.
It is definitely not the norm, especially from like you're expressing that from a man's perspective. Um, I don't think it's the norm at all. And I think we should just shoot another video on that because I think that's such a huge topic, and I think your opinion on it is so different from what a lot of people express. But I think it'd be interesting to talk that out a little bit more and talk through like, and I think that also goes into expectations. Like, what's my expectation of my partner in a relationship, and what do I expect them to do and be? And I like the way you express that because I think, and everyone's different, obviously. I say that a lot, but I think the expectation that, okay, I now am with this woman, so she is no longer a beautiful person. She's only beautiful for me. So you can wear, like, I mean, the extreme like example of that would be like, okay, you can't get ready anymore because other people will look at you. You can get ready in the house, right? But only for me. So, but I think hashing through that a little bit would be interesting. Like, what is the point of that? Like, why do we get ready? What do we get out of that? Is that okay? What attention is okay? Is attention seeking okay? All of that kind of stuff I think would be kind of interesting to talk about. So maybe we should do that in a different video. Because I think that's a whole other thing that is going to like take us until
I'm already like,
I know.
Like that's provoking so much thought. But yeah. we would
So let's do another video on that and talk through that. And I think it would be interesting to get people's feedback on that video and on this video, because I think some of the things we talk about aren't like within the norm of probably what people think. I don't know. Maybe more people think like that. It'd be interesting to see what people think. But yeah, it'd be interesting. So if you're watching this, feel free to comment on any of our videos on your thoughts, or if you think that's absolutely crazy, let us know. That would be interesting. But yeah, so that is some of our thoughts on the issues with relationships and some of the problems, and I think communication, vulnerability, expectations, all of that kind of stuff is big and can be worked through or not. Obviously, you are in Nicaragua because I can hear the little like truck driving by.
Terrible.
That's funny.
This does not help. Thanks, guy.
You know, it's life. All right, well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on here.
I look forward to our other conversation.
Yes, let's continue these conversations. We're gonna get into some interesting and probably controversial stuff. I feel that coming. Like
definitely.
There's some controversy coming, but that's fun. It'll be fun. All right, well, thank you.